In this video, we're going to focus on formation of expectations. Let me start with this example. Suppose that you expect the Fed to increase the interest rate in the United States by 1% next month, and you're the only one who knows this. What do you expect to happen to the value of the US dollar at the time when the Fed increases the interest rate? Well, I hope you have guessed that the interest rate should be jumping up at that time if this 1% increase in interest rate comes as a surprise. The way we did this calculation is that we looked at the situation a month from now, interest rates are higher, and then you probably use the interest parity condition to argue that higher interest rates mean higher exchange rate a month from now. But if you did this, you probably assumed that the expectations at that point haven't changed all that much, or the interest rate in the other country also has remained unchanged. So to predict the impact of a variable in the future on the exchange rate, you used a market equilibrium model, a model like the interest parity condition, to figure out what might happen at that point, and use the result to figure out what you should expect about the outcome at that future date. In other words, the exchange rate that we come to expect is the equilibrium exchange rate using an economic model. And the same approach can be used to figure out the expectations about the future of any other variable. But there's a complication. Remember that in order to use the interest parity condition, a month from now, we have to assume that the expectations about the future a month from now haven't changed all that much. So the 1% increase in the interest rate leads to 1% increase in the exchange rate. But how do we know what our expectations will be a month from now? So in order to really analyze what's going to happen a month from now and use it as our expectations, we have to have an idea what we're going to expect a month from now about the future of the economy. So this is a pretty complicated problem. And one shortcut to understand what might be happening is the following. We can come up with some equilibrium conditions for the economy in the long run and assume that at some future date that long run may prevail, and at that point our expectations is that long run outcome, and then work it backwards. Figure out what we should be expecting now about the future, and that future is something that is going to be repeating itself and expectations are going to come true at that point. So that's the technique that we use. We develop long-run models of the economy and use them as the basis for figuring out what might happen in the economy in later years, and that becomes the source of our expectations now or at any other point in time. Now let me emphasize that in macroeconomics, for our purposes, long run is 3 years plus. 1 year is short run and 2 years is the medium run. If we want to determine the long run behavior of the price level or the output of the economy, we use the same approach. We use an economic model of long run, tells us where the economy might be going, and use that as the basis for our expectations about the future. What is also interesting is that we might be able to use economic models not only to shape our own expectations, but also figure out what others might be thinking. Because if a model is commonly shared among many economic agents, then if they use the same model, then they expect something in the future, and we can use the model to figure out what they expect. And that also will be affecting our expectations and our view of what might happen to the exchange rate, to the price level, to the income level, whatever variable we want to predict. One other complication is that expectations are not a fixed number. They're random variables. There are systematic parts, predictable aspects that are based on economic model or can be related to an economic model. However, we are also creative in our thinking, and we might also have some components in our expectations that are not necessarily based on any particular economic model, but could be up and down randomly. For our purposes, we're going to assume that the systematic part is based on the models that we develop, and we test to make sure that those models are reliable. The remaining part, which is random, we're going to assume is wild, but on average 0. The random part does not have any systematic part. Or in other words, we don't systematically make a mistake in terms of overestimating or underestimating outcomes.